But first to the shambolic mess we've created in this country by allowing public health officials and gutless politicians to adopt an unofficial eradication strategy against a virus that will never be fully eradicated, even after all of us are immunised. At this rate, it's hard to see how we will ever return to normal and allow Australians to travel freely in their own country, let alone travel internationally, when we've got these panic-stricken premiers shutting down major cities over a few cases. And yet, it has to be said, that strategy remains largely popular, not just with the media, but with the majority of the public. One wonders whether in 10 or 20 years, we'll look back at this period of collective hysteria and wonder just what happened. How did so many across the world deliberately destroy so many lives and livelihoods by locking down healthy people instead of protecting the very old and infirm? And all to protect us against a virus with a 99.3% survival rate. How many people terrified of COVID-19, so terrified that they have skipped cancer screenings and other vital medical procedures, are aware that this virus has a 99.3% survival rate. Yes, it's dangerous, but its survival rate is much higher than many in the community are aware of. And that 99.3% figure comes from a definitive study carried out by Cambridge University. For Australia, the COVID-19 threat has been very different to the rest of the world, or most of the world, given we are an island nation and we closed our borders last March. But it's clear that more than a year into this crisis, we've learned little on how to handle small outbreaks without causing widespread economic and societal harm. State premiers from Queensland, Victoria, Western Australia and South Australia continue to react hysterically to any threat level by shutting their borders and imposing harsh restrictions rather than having a proportional, targeted response. The one obvious exception is New South Wales, which learnt from its early mistakes and put in place sound contact tracing and QR code processes to ensure it could manage outbreaks without imposing draconian lockdowns, statewide mask mandates, or other illiberal measures. New South Wales' nuanced response has set the gold standard, but it seems Queensland would rather follow in Victoria's footsteps. That spells disaster for the state's tourism sector, which has been hit hard with international border closures and also their premier's penchant for state border closures. This Easter, we were going to have a whopping 1 in 7 Australians holidaying in Queensland. My family was going to be among them. We couldn't find any accommodation, so we're going to be going in June, hopefully. Easter was going to deliver a miracle of sorts for many tourism operators who were barely hanging on. But now that recovery lays in tatters. The 3-day Brisbane lockdown is expected to cost upwards of $2 billion, but the impact will last far longer, according to tourism experts, including Flight Centre co-founder Graham Turner, who said, and I quote, "There is one word that can describe it. It is sheer lunacy." Australia's tourism sector is in grave danger, with thousands of businesses and jobs in jeopardy due to repeated border restrictions and lockdowns. Chief Executive of Queensland Tourism, Daniel Goshwend, believes the lockdown would deliver a devastating blow to businesses when they can least afford it. He fears that many will be forced to shut their doors permanently after this latest setback. And I'll be talking to Daniel shortly about what that industry faces. How are people expected to book a trip interstate, pay good money for airfares, hotels, car hire, when panicky premiers can at any moment order border closures and require 14 days of self-isolation? Not only will holiday makers fear their trip being cancelled, but they cannot be confident that once they travel, they will be able to return home, particularly being able to return home without having to self-quarantine. And where is the Prime Minister in all this? That's a question a lot of people are asking today. Well, far from admonishing these destructive overreactions from state leaders, the Prime Minister has again stood with the Premiers, this time with Premier Palaszczuk. Scott Morrison's backing of the Brisbane lockdown is at odds with his government's policy encouraging Australians to holiday in their own country. The $1.2 billion tourism support package unveiled earlier this month by the Prime Minister, which provides around 800,000 half-price airfares, was supposed to keep the local industry alive. Queensland was the major beneficiary of the package, but that cannot succeed if Premier Palaszczuk has no confidence in her state's contact tracing and simply shuts down her capital city after every outbreak. Meanwhile, we've got New South Wales. They continue to be the saviour of the side, ensuring the economy is firing. They're taking the bulk of overseas arrivals through hotel quarantine, and they're showing that there is a better way to manage this crisis. It's amazing what can be achieved with competent leadership.